Hello, this is Professor Ellen Genovese. I serve as course coordinator for Bio 106. Welcome to Bio 106 Online. We'll begin with Chapter 1, an introduction to human anatomy and physiology. One of the core principles of anatomy and physiology is that structure is always related to function. The word anatomy, if you break down and look at its Greek origin, means a study of structure, or in Greek, a cutting up. Physiology, the study of function, is derived from the Greek term meaning relationship to nature. Let's go through a few examples. Anatomy and physiology always go together. The structure of an organ is what makes the function possible, and the function is enabled by the structure. We'll be studying the cardiovascular system later on this semester. The lower chambers of the heart, the ventricles, are pumps that pump blood out of the heart. And I'm always congested, and I apologize right now, and I can't even play this back and listen to myself, but we're gonna make the best of it. The left ventricle pumps blood to the aorta, and from the aorta, it's distributed to the entire body. The right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs. The left ventricle is much more muscular than the right ventricle because the distance from the aorta down to your toes is much greater than the distance from your heart to the lungs. So the blood pressure must be significantly increased by left ventricular contraction. All right, this one might be a little bit easier. We are primates. We have opposable thumbs. That allows us to grasp objects, right? So the structure of our thumb allows the function of grasping objects. This is something your dog or cat cannot do. The structure of the mouth enables us to engulf food and start the digestive process. Throughout this course, you'll see that many of the terms that we discuss have a Latin or Greek origin. Some also have proper names. An example of this would be Lou Gehrig's disease. At the end of each chapter, we will be going over some Greek and Latin word roots and their associated prefixes and suffixes. Understanding and learning these terms makes it easier for you to be able to dissect names or terms that you haven't come in contact with. I suggest that you start a list starting with Chapter 1. This information will be included on the final exam, however, we will give you a review. Here's an example. Take the term gastroenteritis. Gastro is the word root for stomach. Entero is the word root for intestine. Itis is a suffix for inflammation. When we dissect this word, kind of start at the end at the suffix and then go back to the two word roots. So you would say gastroenteritis means inflammation of the stomach and intestine. Here are some other key terms that we need to understand to progress through this course. Pathology is the study of diseases or diseased tissue. Gross anatomy is the study of structures and growth of a body or body part without the use of a microscope. Radiographic anatomy is the study of X-rays or radioactive substances. These could be dyes and their effects on the body. This is showing an X-ray of a hand, which may be used to assess whether a fracture has occurred. Autopsy is the examination of a dead body, and it's performed primarily to determine the cause of death and to identify any disease states present. Microscopic anatomy involves cytology or histology. Cytology is the study of cells. Histology is the study of tissues. The image shown here is of the blood specimen of someone suffering from leukemia. The purple cells, which have irregular numbers, shapes, and forms, indicate leukemia. Something that we don't cover in this class but might be interesting to think about is comparative anatomy. Comparative anatomy looks at the similarities and differences in the anatomy of different organisms. You can see the image there that the four limbs of a bird, a whale, a horse, and a human are very similar in bone structure. Surface anatomy is the configuration of the surface of the body, especially in relation to its internal parts. That's an alien school. We're not going to study aliens. The approach that we're going to take in this class is that of systemic anatomy. We're going to start discussing each of the organ systems in detail. Right now, take a few moments to know and learn a function and a few organs from each of the organ systems. A good way to remember all of the organ systems that we're going to study is using the acronym RUN, Mrs. Leidig. Let's see if I can do this. Reproductive, urinary, nervous, muscular, respiratory, skeletal, lymphatic, integumentary, digestive, endocrine, and cardiovascular. Note that in some textbooks, cardiovascular and lymphatic are combined together, forming the circulatory system. Let's look at the biological organization of multicellular organisms. Cells are the smallest unit of life. This is the smallest entity that can be considered to be living. Tissues are where groups of cells function together. Organs consist of two or more tissues that interact together and have a specialized function. Organ systems consist of organs that are structurally or functionally related. Organ systems combine to make up the entire organism. Let's look at an example of this. The first slide is showing cardiac muscle cells. Cardiac muscle cells are fibers combined together to form cardiac muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle tissue is one of the tissues that's found inside the human heart. The human heart also consists of epithelial and connective tissues. The heart is one organ that's found in the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is one of the organ systems found in a human. Let's look at anatomical position. Anatomical position is a universally used way of referencing body parts or their positions relative to each other. Anatomical position consists of an individual standing erect, eyes are front and open, upper limbs are down at the side, palms face upward, and feet are flat. So even if your upper arms are above your head or your palms are facing backwards, when referencing structures or organs or relationships to each other, you always revert back to anatomical position. Here's some directional terms, and all these directional terms are based on anatomical position. Superior. Superior means above another part. For instance, you could say that your eyes are superior to your nose. Inferior refers to below another part. For instance, you could say, let's see, I'm trying to think of it. Your stomach is inferior to your diaphragm. Anterior ventral means towards the front. Very often these terms can be used interchangeably. Ventral, let me put the next one, or dorsal, these are typically used when referencing instructions on quadrupeds. These are animals that stand on all fours. Their correct anatomical position will be as they're standing on all fours. You don't need to really worry about when do I use anterior, when can I use ventral. That'll be explained. So anterior means towards the front. I could say like your abdomen is anterior part of your body. Posterior means towards the back. Your scapula is located on your posterior aspect. Your scapula meaning your shoulder blade. Medial means towards the middle, right? The nose is medial to the eyes, where lateral means toward the side. If you look at the bones that are in your forearms, your radius is lateral to your ulna. Here's some additional terms. When referencing arms and legs, because they are so freely movable, instead of using the terms superior and inferior, the terms that are used are proximal or distal. So proximal means closer to the point of attachment to the trunk. So you could say your elbow is proximal to your hand. That means your elbow is closer to the trunk than your hand. Distal means further from the point of attachment to your trunk. You could say your toes are the most distal structure of your legs. Superficial means situated near the surface. Right? So you could say that your ribs are superficial to your heart, where deep means more eternal. Here's an example. Let's put these terms all together. So here we have an individual that was, I don't know how this happened, was shot with a pellet gun on their shin. Okay, we will be going over the regional terms a little bit later on. So you're going to start with what is the universally accepted name of the region. So it's the left leg, right? And the front of the leg is the crural region. So left crural. Now we need to add some descriptive terms. Okay, where is this located on their crural region? So that would involve some measurements and using the term proximal and distal. Okay, obviously it's on the front of their leg, anterior, somewhat on the middle, so it's medial, right? Proximal to the tarsal region, that's your ankle, right? So it's closer to your trunk than your ankle, but distal to the patella region, patella being your kneecap. So it's further away from the trunk than your kneecap. The wound that was made is deep to the skin, but superficial to muscle and bone. Putting it all together, you would say that this individual's wound is on the left, anteromedial, so you can put anterior and medial together to form the term anteromedial, crural region, 6 centimeters proximal to the distal region, and 10 centimeters distal to the patella region. Pellet is lodged deep to the skin and muscle, but superficial to the bone. That just gives you an idea how you can use these terms together. Right? Do not have to worry, the exam questions are not going to be this complicated. Next, we're going to look at body planes. Right? A plane is kind of an imaginary line that divides a structure. A section is if you actually took a knife and made a cut in that direction. So there's 3 main ways that the body or an individual organ could be divided. You could divide it into right and left, right? So that's a sagittal plane. If the plane is directly down the middle, then you use the term mid-sagittal. If you're going to divide a structure into the top and bottom, superior and inferior sections, then you would use the word transverse. If you're looking at a tube-like structure, like an intestine, you might use the term cross-section. Horizontal plane is also acceptable. And you could divide the body into the front and the back, anterior and posterior. This is called the coronal or frontal plane. Not that this is an accident, but if the plane is angled, right? If it's not going from front to back, it's not sagittal, it's not going top to bottom, transverse, it's not going front to back, right? Or coronal. If it's on some sort of an angle, then the term is used as oblique. It just means angled. So as we're going through this, you'll see that there's very specific terms that are used to define directions of the body, the reference point they're going to use. Next, we're going to look at abdominal pelvic regions. So in physiological studies, this could be maybe by somebody studying anatomy, the abdominal area is divided into 9 regions. Yeah, I always think the easiest way to look at this is to start in the middle, where your belly button, do not use the term belly button, where your umbilicus is located, and that's the umbilical region. Remember we said that gastroenteritis was inflammation in the stomach intestine? Similar way, epigastric means above the stomach. Hypo, like hypoglycemic, means below the stomach. And then notice something very interesting here. What you were seeing on the left hand, like your left side of the slide, is the right side of this diagram, this individual, this patient. So when you're looking at someone, you're viewing a mirror image. So whatever on your light is the left of that structure, patient image. Okay? So underneath the ribs, we have right and left hypochondriac region. You start getting into the lumbar region of your back. Gives us right and left lumbar. And then the iliac or inguinal region is near like the top of your hips. Your hip bone is where you put your hands on your hips. That's actually called your ilium. Just to summarize these, okay, epigastric upper middle, right, left and right, hypogastric, either side of epigastric. Umbilical, the middle region. Right and left lumbar, either side of the umbilical. Hypogastric, lower middle. On either side of that, the right and left iliac. So the human body consists of a variety of cavities. Some of these cavities are formed by bone, many are formed by membranes. This helps to compartmentalize, helps to protect particular structures. So looking at the human body, you can see the main cavities here. You have the above your diaphragm, your thoracic cavity, below your diaphragm, abdominal cavity, cranial cavity, spinal cavity. Just looking at this mid-sagittal section, there's a couple different ways you can look at body cavities. You can kind of just view them as the front and the back. So the ventral cavities or thoracic, abdominal. It's not indicated on this diagram, but when you get lower in the abdominal cavity near where the urinary bladder is, reproductive organs, that's also referred to as the pelvic cavity. And the dorsal cavity consists of the cranial and spinal cavity. Now, this is, the organization's kind of like if you had a filing cabinet, right? So a drawer in your filing cabinet would be the thoracic cavity. And inside that drawer, you have a variety of folders, okay? So within the thoracic cavity, there are some subcategories. You have 2 pleural cavities. Each contains a lung. 2 individual cavities, one around each lung. The mediastinum is the area between the lungs. This is where the heart is located. This kind of separates the thoracic cavity into 2. It also contains portions of the esophagus, the trachea, and the thymus gland. The heart itself contains its own cavity, and that's called the pericardial cavity. Any of these organs, like your many organs in your digestive system, your heart, your lungs, they move, they contract, they expand, right? They may collapse. The reason for this membrane, kind of membrane-bound structure that surrounds them is to allow for this type of movement, help prevent friction from these organs rubbing up against other organs. Okay, now anteriorly we also have the abdominal cavity, the pelvic cavity, and sometimes because there is no real distinct barrier, it's just called the abdominal pelvic cavity. The diaphragm is the clear boundary between the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. Okay, between the abdominal and pelvic cavity, it's just kind of like association of where the structures are located. All right, so we're talking about these different cavities, and these different cavities are formed by membranes. The membranes that line these cavities. And the membrane has kind of two sides. It has like the outer side that lines the cavity, and then it has the inner side that's adhered to the surface of the organ. So look at the little picture of the hand punching the balloon. You have one balloon, but if it's fairly deflated and you stick your hand in it, the hand is now covered by one continuous layer that folds back around itself. The outer layer, the layer that lines the cavity, is called the parietal membrane. So in the abdominal area, you have the parietal peritoneum, right? Outer layer of the membrane surrounding the heart is the parietal pericardium. And in referencing the lungs, it's called the parietal pleura. This membrane generates a very thin watery fluid, which is called serous fluid, that helps prevent friction from building up between the two layers. The visceral layer lines the surface of the organs. So in the abdominal area, there'd be the visceral peritoneum, the heart, the visceral pericardium. This is also referred to as the epicardium, and surrounding the lungs is the visceral pleura. There's a really good video link below this lecture which demonstrates serous membranes. Okay, so again, serous just refers to the fact that the membrane itself is generating a very thin watery fluid that helps prevent friction between the two layers. The next topic that we're going to discuss, which is very important to human anatomy, physiology, is that of homeostasis. Homeostasis is a state of balance where the body's internal environment remains in normal ranges. So in humans, there's a whole bunch of homeostatic mechanisms: hunger, thirst, blood pressure, pulse, water balance, right? And during the course of the day, during the different activities, environmental factors, right? These, this internal environment is going to fluctuate, and then the body's goal is to bring it back within a normal range. Disease, if you have a disease, it's when there's a disruption in homeostasis. For instance, let's look at blood glucose, right? So you eat a bagel and it's digested, and the sugar enters your bloodstream, and insulin is the hormone that allows your cells to uptake glucose, which they use as an energy source. So release of insulin decreases your body's blood glucose levels. Well, now you haven't had anything to eat for a while, and your blood glucose level starts to drop. Glucagon is a hormone that's released to help elevate your blood glucose level. So blood glucose level has a fairly narrow normal range, and hormones are released to try to maintain homeostasis. Glycogen is individual glucose units that are linked together in a storage form, right, in the liver. The pancreas is the organ that releases insulin and glucagon. The blood vessels, this is where insulin, glucagon, glucose are all transported. So just look at the circle at the bottom, right? And it just continues all day long, going round and round, trying to keep your blood glucose level within normal range. Okay, we'll start at the very bottom, glucose in the bloodstream. You just ate a donut. Insulin secreted when blood glucose levels rise after eating, right? So that your cells are able to utilize the glucose and excess glucose is stored in the liver. So glucose is stored as glycogen in the liver, and glucagon is secreted when your blood glucose levels fall, so that the glycogen can be broken down and released into your bloodstream as glucose. Okay. What's another indicator that there's a deviation from your blood glucose hemostasis is hangry. Your brain is the most sensitive organ to decreases in blood glucose level, which is anatomically or physiologically why you feel hangry. Let's look at oxygen. All your cells need oxygen to undergo respiration and to survive. If you were to start exercising, your skeletal muscles are contracting, they're using energy, they need more oxygen, and you have an increase in your respiration rate, right? Your breaths start to become closer together and you start breathing more deeply. As I mentioned before, is disease when you have a deviation from homeostasis. So we can kind of just look quickly over the two examples that we studied. If somebody is diabetic, means they're not producing enough insulin, or the insulin that they're producing is not sufficient, and so they maintain high blood glucose levels, which, kind of really sounds like a really good sugar high all the time. However, high blood glucose levels can affect your capillaries, can put extra burden on your kidney function, right? So it can be a lot of, negative outcomes that can occur from somebody that has unmanaged diabetes, right? So oxygen, if somebody has emphysema or COPD, that restricts the amount of oxygen that can enter into their bloodstream, and so they may become very winded, tired with just minimal exertion. So now we've kind of gone over two homeostatic mechanisms, blood glucose and oxygen levels. So this is just going through, I kind of like to do the examples first because these terms are sometimes a little tricky to understand. For these two mechanisms and all other homeostatic mechanisms in the human body, there need to be receptors. There's sensory receptors that provide information about specific conditions, right? So you have, we're going to get into this a little bit in the respiratory system, peripheral respiratory chemoreceptors that are detecting your blood oxygen levels and your CO2 levels, right? Same thing with blood glucose levels. And then there's got to be a set point. A set point is like, what is this value? What should it be? Most often the set point is found in your hypothalamus, right? So there's receptors that are sending information all the time, right, to the hypothalamus, which is interpreting these stimuli to see whether a deviation has occurred. And then there needs to be some type of an effector, some type of response that if the, whatever situation is, if the blood oxygen levels become too low, there's a effectors that respond that alter conditions, right, to hope to maintain homeostasis, right? So you detect higher CO2 or lower OT levels, you start breathing more rapidly and deeply, right? Blood glucose level drops, glucagon's released, blood glucose level becomes too high, insulin's released. So just like the circle that we saw, right, with blood glucose, this is kind of showing the same thing. So you have, we'll start at the bottom, response. I'll start with receptors. Here are the receptors, right? They're always sending information, but the speed at which they're transmitting an impulse, right, can indicate whether a change occurred. So there's a stimulus, there's a change that occurs. Receptors detect this, they're sending information to the set point. In the control center, the hypothalamus detects that this is a deviation from the normal range, and then there's some type of effect, right? So it could involve muscles, such as breathing. It could involve glands, such as the pancreas, and then the response is corrected. And a lot of these occur and you don't even realize it. So the type of mechanisms that we've been discussing, this is what occurs predominantly in the human body, and this is called negative feedback, okay, which has a lot of really kind of complicated definitions, but the way that I always think about it is there's a change that's detected and you want to negate that change. You want to correct that change to bring the body back within normal limits. So another example would be control of body temperature. You start exercising, your body starts to heat up, there's sensory receptors in your skin, right, throughout your body. They send information to the thermoregulatory center in the brain. And there's a couple things that occur. One thing is your blood vessels near your skin dilate to help you dump some heat through radiant cooling. You may also start sweating, and both these mechanisms, right, are intended to reverse the effects of the stimulus, reverse the effects of becoming warm, to cool your body down. Very rare in the human body, and there's only 2 examples we're going to cover. I know some anatomy books kind of include some other examples, but there's only really 2 that I think are most decent example of positive feedbacks, or the only really true examples of positive feedback. This is where the response to the stimulus moves the body further away from the set point. Right? So one example of this is labor. So during labor, right, the baby starts to drop, the uterus stretches, this information is sent to the control center in the brain, which causes a release of the hormone oxytocin, which causes more uterine contractions. You have more dilation, stretching of the cervix, which then causes the release of even more oxytocin. Then I have ... Could be a few hours, could be a whole day. Childbirth occurs. So, whether you've had a child or, a friend of yours, anyone's had a child, seeing this on TV, labor starts very, very small contractions that are fairly far apart time-wise. The contractions become stronger and become closer together until childbirth occurs, at which time the uterus stops contracting. So positive feedback mechanisms are very short-lived. Okay, labor doesn't seem short-lived, but your uterus is not going to keep contracting the rest of your life. The only other example of positive feedback in the human body we're going to study later on is that of blood clotting, right? So your blood is flowing along, it's not adhering or sticking to the inside of your vessel walls, right? But if you receive some type of vascular injury, you cut yourself, now there's a jagged edge, and that causes platelets to stick together to adhere to the area of injury, and they release substances that then causes the formation of fibrin threads that reinforce this area and form a blood clot. Okay, so you're going from smoothly flowing to piling up, forming a clot, and once the injury heals, the clot is then destroyed. So positive feedback, you're going away from the set point for a short period of time, right, and then going back within the normal range. Let's look at, for chapter 1, our Greek and Latin word parts. So cardi, right, word root for heart, crane, skull, homeo, same, meta, change, ology or lology, right? So we're not going to get into all the semantics of this, but if you're adding a suffix and the word root doesn't have a vowel, then you'd use O-L-O-G-Y, like psychology. If your word root, like bio, study of life, biology, you wouldn't use the O. Okay, we're not going to go crazy with all the little kind of semantic rules. Okay, ologist, logist, one who specializes in. Perite means wall. Peri, around. Stasis, standing still. Sometimes you have just a word root and you just kind of need to add an ending to it. So A-L, I-A-L, E-A-L, O-U-S are just kind of endings to word roots that mean pertaining to. We have an example of this coming up. Study of the heart. Cardiology. Pertaining to the skull. Cranial. That's what pertaining to, right? Cranial. One who specializes in the heart, specifically treatment of diseases and disorders. Right? If issue of the heart, you would go to a cardiologist. Pertaining to around the heart, a couple word parts here. Right? Peri, around, card, heart, heel, pertaining to around the heart. And you don't need to worry about what pertaining to ending you're going to use. You just kind of need to know the definition of the entire word. Ooh, this one's interesting. Stable without change. Homeostasis. All right, this one's really difficult. Beyond control to move or change. Metastasis, or we refer to as metastasis. This refers to a tumor where cells break off the primary tumor and spread to another location. So if someone has a cancerous tumor that has undergone metastasis. Pertaining to the body wall. Parietal. I hope you've enjoyed Chapter 1.